What if I told you that AEW Rampage was always destined to fail? You might not believe me, but when AEW Rampage first came onto the scene back in the summer of 2021, it was expected to be AEW's version of SmackDown, a 1B show on the level of AEW Dynamite. However, the unfortunate reality is just a few years later, AEW Rampage was a dead product. But how exactly did Rampage go from one of the newest and hottest shows in professional wrestling to just 3 years later being canceled completely? I'm going to talk about that in this video, and I'm also going to talk about why it didn't have to be this way. Because AEW Rampage, when it began, felt like the change that AEW had promised. It felt like exactly what AEW needed to take that next step into creating additional content. And while I do think that there was merit to the original idea of Rampage, I also personally believe that what Rampage was promised to be early on was fool's gold. And the reality was that there was no way that Rampage, at its time, at its length, at its status, could have ever been anything more than what it truly was, and that was AEW's version of Sunday Night Heat. All that much more coming up right here in this video. I'm Big Ohm for Real Take Wrestling. Be sure to smash that thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Let's dive right in. As I said before, when AEW announced that they were adding another hour of television per week, it was met with thunderous applause by many wrestling fans. Fans who believed that this would allow AEW to not only expand on storylines that were told on Dynamite, but also give new talent a place and a platform to shine like it was not available to them on AEW Dynamite. For the longest time, the only way for a lot of B-level talent to get consistent time in the ring or on TV was through AEW Dark and Dark Elevation. And while those shows certainly had a place in AEW and a reason to exist, the fact is that it was not as worthy and not as important as being on television. Because at the end of the day, television is what AEW is trying to produce. Television is what AEW gets paid on, and television is what AEW as a company prioritizes its time and creative for. You will never get the same level of effort put into a show like Dark. So the idea that AEW was going to add an extra hour of TV prime time on TNT was amazing, because now you could give extra time to storylines that were developing. You could have talent maybe specific to that show. You could have a place to highlight those younger talent. And then we were told about the time slot. Tony Khan announced that AEW Rampage would indeed premiere in August of 2021, and the premiere date was set to be Friday at 10 p.m. Yes, you did not hear me incorrectly. From the beginning, Rampage was supposed to be on at Fridays at 10 p.m. because nobody on the East Coast or otherwise has anything better to do on a Friday night at 10 p.m. than watch professional wrestling every week. What the f*** were you thinking? Anyway, but that was the announcement. And look, the first couple of episodes of AEW Rampage were built to be pretty big. The first ever episode was coming from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That show was built around two things: Britt Baker defending her AEW World Championship, and then Kenny Omega defending the TNA World Championship against Christian Cage. And that show was built around star power, actual stars. You had Fuego del Sol as well have a huge moment getting his AEW contract right there in the ring. And it felt like not only was Rampage going to be an important show, prioritized at the same level of Dynamite, but we were also going to get newer stars integrated. It was fulfilling the promise in week 1. And then we go to week 2 and we fulfill the promise even more, because we get arguably the biggest moment of the past 10 years in professional wrestling: CM Punk's return. It was a moment in time. You will never forget where you were when you saw CM Punk walk down the aisle in front of a sold-out United Center at AEW First Dance live at 10 p.m. on TNT and garnering over 1 million viewers on average. The highest rating that Rampage has ever or will ever receive. This was insane. Week to week, AEW Rampage had killer ratings. Week to week, for the first 2 weeks, AEW Rampage delivered on major moments, major matches, and major stars coming into the mix. And everyone expected it to last forever. However, unfortunately, that was never going to be the case. Over the years, AEW Rampage's ratings began to slip, and along with it, the prioritization and creative felt like it was also waning as much as the ratings. And it felt like Rampage became more of a burden for AEW to produce. Yes, they were certainly still getting paid a boatload of money from WBD to produce it. Yes, it was still a place where talent could get relevant TV time. But at the end, Rampage was facing just about 200,000 live viewers on average, if not 300,000 at its highest. And in the last couple of years, you didn't get the major moments of high-profile talent on the show. Instead, you would get a lot of AEW's B stars and then even the C stars who would have otherwise been on AEW Dark. And in the summer of 2023, the addition of AEW Collision certainly didn't help things, because in that way, AEW certainly had their 1B. AEW Collision was supposed to be a show that was built around stars like CM Punk, stars like FTR, and there was almost a mini roster split in the beginning. So it begged the question, where does Rampage fit into everything? And that answer became very clear when WBD announced their extension of AEW in September of 2024, where it was announced that AEW Collision and Dynamite would both continue on in its current form, and you would have an expansion of the AEW library coming to Max, and an integration of live content for AEW Collision and Dynamite as well. So you had all of this stuff announced, all of this stuff in the press release, all of this stuff that sounded so cool, but no mention of Rampage. And in December of 2024, without really announcing it at all, Tony Khan just tweeted out that the last edition of Rampage would premiere on that Christmas week from the Hammerstein Ballroom. And it ended with a big schmoz with the Death Riders, and the Rampage era was officially over. And it was very sad to see, because when you watch those first couple of episodes of Rampage, there was that excitement. There was an excitement about not only Rampage, not only AEW, but about professional wrestling as a whole. The fact that Rampage existed was a demonstration of how healthy professional wrestling was. It was a demonstration about how hot professional wrestling is. It's a demonstration about the future of pro wrestling, and that it has one on TV. Everything that AEW Dynamite had accomplished, Rampage was further validation. And the fact of the matter is, it led to AEW having even more ability to highlight and platform high-level talent, because Rampage is what led to AEW being trusted enough with WBD to have 2 additional hours of live television in AEW Collision. So in the end, even though Rampage died, it did help AEW in the sense that it proved that AEW could do more content, it could produce more content, and it could draw eyeballs. Now, again, I understand that juxtaposed to the ratings that Rampage had at the end are pretty weird statements, but the fact remains that AEW Rampage was probably doing better than whatever else Warner Brothers Discovery would have put in that time slot. And professional wrestling, compared to other forms of original content, are pretty easy and cheaper to produce. So it made sense for WBD It just didn't make sense long term to pay them for that 5th hour of television when they could get bang for their buck out of those 4 that they had for Collision and Dynamite. Now the big question remains, how could AEW have saved Rampage? My point is very simple. I think that while it would have been difficult, you needed to treat Rampage as if it had some level of importance. And I think that the key thing that's missing from Rampage at the end compared to where it was in the beginning was major moments advancing storylines. Because Kenny Omega versus Christian Cage wasn't simply a match. It was advancing a larger storyline between the two that culminated at that awesome all-out pay-per-view in 2021. The first dance was not simply a major moment, which it was, but it was advancing a storyline of not only CM Punk and his return to wrestling, but CM Punk and Darby Allin. And that week-to-week advancement, that reason that you tune in, simply wasn't there at the end. It's a combination of the deprioritization as Collision came into the fold. It's a combination of the fact that I think AEW can only, in their current capacity, produce a certain number of hours of TV, and it's just very difficult to do that when you don't have that infrastructure in place. I think in even that way, Rampage was probably just destined to die. And it's sad to say that. It could have had something done about it. You could have had ROH take over and made it ROH Rampage, but I think towards the end, it wouldn't have mattered. It only would have devalued the product as it already was. There was no saving Rampage. There was no getting it back on its feet. I think AEW Rampage was viewed at that point in the latter part of 2024 as the C show, and a clear C show. And to that degree, there's no point in saving a C show. You're better off just starting a new show if you're going to have that opportunity. You're better off creating AEW Shockwave. You're better off creating AEW Overdrive, whatever the hell. It just was never going to work. And I think the point of no return was well past them in 2024. So could it have been saved? Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but certainly would have been a very difficult challenge. I want to hear from you though in the comments. What do you guys think about the downfall of AEW Rampage? Could it have been avoided? Should it have been avoided? Or was it just a product of its time and we should have just enjoyed it while it lasted? Let me know in the comment section below. Also be sure to smash that thumbs up, subscribe, hit that notification bell, become a channel member, hit that join button, get yourself access to exclusive content fast, first, and foremost. Hit that join button. Enjoy all of the wonderful stuff that I have planned for you there. Until next time, I'm Big Ohm for Real Take Wrestling. Be happy, be healthy, and as always, keep it real.